A simple act of kindness in a quiet diner caught the eye of a billionaire and changed her life forever. Emily wiped the sweat from her forehead as she balanced a tray full of steaming plates. It had been a long day at the small family diner she worked at, and her feet ached from standing for hours. The diner wasn't fancy. It was the kind of place where the smell of fried eggs mixed with the aroma of fresh coffee. Even the walls were lined with pictures of happy families who had been coming for years. Emily had been working here for nearly 3 years. And while the work was hard, she liked the simple rhythm of it, the sizzle of the grill, the clatter of dishes, the hum of conversation from the regulars. But today was different. Today felt heavier. She had started early in the morning, rushing to make breakfast for a diner full of early risers, then had barely a short break before diving into lunch. Now, the evening crowd had arrived. Her energy was almost gone, despite her exhaustion. Emily kept a smile on her face as she approached a small, elderly man sitting alone in the corner. His hair was thin and white, and his hands trembled slightly as he reached for his menu. He looked confused, as if he wasn't quite sure what to order. Emily knelt down beside him, her voice soft and kind. "Can I help you with the menu, sir?" she asked. The man blinked and nodded slowly. He seemed relieved that someone was paying attention, that someone cared. Emily patiently explained the specials, recommended a dish she thought he would enjoy, and even suggested a dessert he might like. She watched carefully as he made his decision. Making sure he wasn't struggling with anything on his plate, she poured his coffee and refilled it without being asked, carefully cutting his food into bite-sized pieces because she noticed he had difficulty handling utensils. All the while, she talked to him gently, asking about his day, about his family, trying to make him feel comfortable. Emily wasn't doing it for praise or recognition. She was simply responding to what she felt was the right thing to do. She had grown up helping her mother, who had taught her that kindness didn't have to be rewarded to be worth giving. But she was tired. Her shoulders ached, her back throbbed, and her eyes were heavy. She barely had time to breathe, yet she moved with patience and care. What Emily didn't know was that she wasn't alone. In the corner of the diner, tucked behind a stack of menus, a man in a crisp suit sat quietly, observing her. His presence was subtle, almost invisible, like a shadow. Emily didn't notice him. She focused entirely on the elderly man, making sure he was comfortable, making sure he felt seen. She laughed at his light jokes, nodded at his stories, and offered gentle reassurances when he seemed nervous. It wasn't an act. It was her nature. The man in the corner watched silently, noting every small gesture, how she refilled the coffee without making it seem like a chore, how she knelt beside him to be at his level, how she made eye contact and smiled genuinely. The diner buzzed around her. Plates clinked, coffee machines hissed, and the sound of the television murmured softly in the background. Other customers came and went, some calling out for refills or asking for the specials. But Emily's attention never wavered. She had a gift for making people feel important, even in the middle of a busy restaurant. She didn't treat the elderly man differently because she thought anyone was watching. There were no cameras, no audience, no expectation of reward. There was just her heart, and the person she was helping. As the minutes passed, the elderly man's shoulders relaxed. He seemed lighter, happier, almost as if the weight of the day had been lifted slightly. Emily smiled to herself, a small flicker of satisfaction warming her. It was moments like these that reminded her why she kept working so hard. Not for the tips, which were barely enough to cover the bills, and certainly not for the long hours, which often left her aching from head to toe, but for the small ways she could make someone else's life better. It was exhausting, yes? But it was also rewarding in a way that nothing else could match. The man in the corner continued to watch quietly. He noticed the way Emily's hands moved, the way she seemed to anticipate the needs of the people around her without being asked. He noticed the gentleness in her voice, the patience in her movements, and the warmth in her smile. It wasn't just the act of serving food, he realized. It was the way she treated people, the way she cared without expecting anything in return, that set her apart. Most people would have been too tired, too busy, or too distracted to notice someone struggling. But Emily had seen the man, had responded to him fully, and had done so with grace and kindness. When the elderly man finished his meal, Emily carefully packaged the leftovers for him, making sure he had everything he needed. She thanked him for coming and wished him a good evening. Her voice still calm and cheerful, despite the fatigue creeping into her limbs. He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, and nodded. He left the diner slowly, his cane tapping gently on the floor, and Emily watched until he disappeared through the door. After he left, Emily leaned against the counter for a moment, taking a deep breath. Her body ached, her mind was tired, and yet she felt something else, something she couldn't quite put into words. There was a quiet satisfaction in having helped someone without seeking recognition, without expecting anything in return. It was a small moment in a long day, but it was meaningful. She straightened up, wiped down the counter, and prepared for the next customer, unaware that someone had been watching, taking mental notes of everything she had done, and that this small act of kindness was about to change her life in ways she could never imagine. As the evening wore on, Emily continued her shift with the same dedication. She greeted each customer with a smile, took each order with care, and moved with a quiet efficiency born from years of experience. She didn't know that her simple, human kindness, the way she had treated a struggling elderly man as if he were the most important person in the diner, was leaving a lasting impression on someone who had the power to change her life forever. In the midst of the ordinary chaos of a diner, a quiet, unnoticed act of compassion was about to ripple outward in ways Emily could never have predicted. Emily had just cleared the last of the plates from the elderly man's table when she noticed a man sitting quietly in the corner, observing her. At first, she thought he was just another customer, maybe a businessman grabbing a quick dinner. He was dressed neatly in a suit, the kind of clothes Emily had only seen on television or in magazines. His hair was perfectly combed, and there was something in the way he sat, calm, composed, and attentive, that made him stand out from the usual crowd at the diner. She went about her work, refilling coffee cups and taking orders, completely unaware that he was paying more attention to her than to anything else in the room. When Emily finally had a moment to breathe, the man waved subtly and motioned for her to come over. Curious but cautious, she approached his table with a smile. "Hi, what can I get for you?" she asked politely, expecting the usual order of eggs or a sandwich. The man smiled in return, but it wasn't just a smile. It was thoughtful. It's almost as if he were studying her rather than asking for food. "Actually," he began, his voice calm and measured, "I was hoping to talk to you for a few minutes. Can I ask you some questions?" Emily hesitated. Usually, people didn't want to talk at the diner beyond ordering their meals, and she was tired. Her mind raced through possibilities. Maybe he was doing a survey. Maybe he was from a local newspaper, but something about his tone made her stay. She nodded, pulled up a chair, and sat down across from him. "Sure, I can answer a few questions," she said cautiously, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. The man's questions started simple. "How long have you worked here?" he asked. "Do you enjoy it?" Emily answered honestly. She explained how she'd been working at the diner for 3 years, taking double shifts when she needed extra money to pay for her mother's medical bills. She spoke about the long hours, the exhaustion, and the pressure to keep smiling, no matter how tired she was. She admitted that some days were harder than others, but she tried to focus on the small joys, the friendly customers, the laughter that sometimes filled the diner, and the little moments when she could make someone's day better. As Emily spoke, the man listened carefully, nodding at times, asking follow-up questions that seemed surprisingly personal. "What motivates you to keep going when it gets hard?" he asked. Emily looked down at her hands for a moment, thinking. She had never really considered why she kept pushing herself. "I guess I just want to make life a little easier for others," she said quietly. "My mom depends on me, and I've seen how much kindness from strangers can matter. I try to be that for people." The man leaned back slightly, observing her with a look that made her feel both nervous and curious. There was a calm authority about him, but no judgment, just interest. He asked about her future plans, if she had dreams beyond the diner. Emily hesitated. She had dreams, but they seemed impossible to reach. She wanted to study business, maybe open her own small cafe one day. But money and responsibilities kept her tied to the diner. She spoke honestly about her fears, about how she often felt stuck, despite wanting more for herself and her family. As their conversation continued, Emily began to notice little details about the man. He asked about her work ethic, how she handled stress, and how she treated customers, especially the elderly and those who struggled. Emily didn't understand why he was so interested, but she answered honestly. She described the way she always tried to notice when someone needed help, even if no one else did. She told him about the elderly man she had just served, explaining how she liked to make sure he was comfortable, how she refilled his coffee without being asked, and how she tried to make him feel respected. The man smiled slightly, and for the first time, Emily sensed there was more to him than just curiosity. He wasn't just asking questions to pass the time. There was a depth to his interest, a purpose behind his attention that Emily couldn't quite place. Yet, despite her curiosity, she didn't ask who he really was. Something about the moment felt private, almost like sharing a small secret with a stranger. She continued to answer his questions, feeling both tired and strangely energized, as if her own words reminded her why she worked so hard in the first place. Time passed, and the diner began to empty as the evening drew to a close. Emily started clearing tables and taking care of last-minute orders, but the man remained seated, still observing, still listening. He asked a few more questions about her family, about how she managed her mother's medical bills, and about her hopes for the future. Emily spoke candidly, surprised at how comfortable she felt opening up to a stranger who didn't judge her, who simply seemed interested in understanding her life. Finally, the man glanced at his watch and shook his head slightly. "I shouldn't keep you any longer," he said. Emily smiled politely, feeling a little sad that the conversation was ending. "It's okay." "Thank you for talking to me," she said. He nodded, then reached into his jacket pocket and left a tip on the table. It was not large, just enough to be polite, but there was something in the way he placed it that suggested he valued more than just the service he received. Emily thanked him quietly, thinking little of it. She assumed he was just another customer who appreciated her effort. She didn't realize that every word she had spoken, every gesture of kindness she had shown, had been noted carefully. The man left the diner without fanfare, slipping out into the evening like any ordinary visitor, but in reality, he carried with him an impression that would stay with him far longer than a simple meal. As she finished her shift and began closing up, Emily reflected on the conversation. It was unusual, yes, but it hadn't changed anything in her routine. She still had dishes to wash, floors to mop, and bills to think about. And yet there was a subtle sense that something different had happened, something she couldn't yet name. She didn't know that the man who had spoken to her was not just a curious stranger, but someone with the power to alter the course of her life. Emily went home that night, tired but with a quiet satisfaction. She didn't realize that in sharing her story, showing her true self without pretense or expectation, she had made an impression that would soon lead to an opportunity unlike anything she could have imagined. The ordinary diner, the simple conversation, and her willingness to be genuine had set in motion a chain of events that would change her world forever. In the corner of the diner that night, the man walked away, unseen by Emily, thinking about her kindness, her honesty, and her resilience. He had seen something rare, something that couldn't be taught or bought. He knew that the small acts she had done without expecting anything in return spoke volumes about her character. And in that quiet observation, he began to form a plan that would soon bring Emily from the ordinary rhythm of her diner life into a world she had only dreamed about. Emily had barely finished her last cup of tea at home when her phone rang. The screen showed an unfamiliar number, and for a moment she hesitated before answering. "Hello," she said, her voice tired but polite. On the other end was a calm, confident voice that sounded professional yet oddly familiar. "Is this Emily Thompson?" the caller asked. Emily confirmed, wondering who could be calling at this hour. "Yes, this is she." "May I ask who's calling?" she said. The voice explained that they were calling from a local office and requested that she come in the next morning for a formal conversation. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She was used to calls from banks, her mother's doctors, or occasionally from the diner. But this didn't sound like any of those. A formal conversation? She repeated, her mind racing with possibilities. Had she done something wrong at work? Was there a problem with her mother's bills? She could feel her chest tighten with a mix of curiosity and anxiety. The caller reassured her that it was nothing to worry about, but they were insistent that she come to the office early the next morning. Emily agreed, though reluctantly, and hung up the phone. She sat in silence for a few minutes, staring at the wall. Her mind was spinning. She had no idea who would call her like this, why, or what it could mean. Could it be a job offer? A scam? A mistake? The questions piled up, and sleep became almost impossible. She lay in bed thinking about the previous evening at the diner, replaying every detail of her interaction with the man in the corner. Could it somehow be connected? The thought seemed far-fetched, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something unusual was happening. The next morning, Emily dressed carefully, choosing her best outfit from the limited wardrobe she had. She wanted to make a good impression, though she had no idea who she was about to meet. As she stepped outside, the cold morning air hit her, making her shiver. She held her bag tightly and walked to the address the caller had given her. A tall building in the city that looked unlike any office she had ever been inside. Its glass walls gleamed in the early sunlight, and the lobby was polished and grand. Emily felt a sudden wave of nervousness. She had never been in a place like this before, and the contrast with the humble diner where she worked was overwhelming. A receptionist greeted her politely and led her to an elevator. Emily's heart pounded with every step. She was led to a large office on a high floor where she was asked to wait. The room was quiet, filled with the soft hum of computers and the occasional murmur of employees walking past. Emily sat on a sleek chair, feeling small and out of place. She wondered if she had misread the call entirely. If this was some mistake or misunderstanding. Then the door opened, and the man from the diner stepped in. Emily's eyes widened in shock. He looked exactly the same, neat, calm, and confident, but now she saw him in a completely new light. This wasn't just a stranger observing her at a diner. This was Alexander Brandt, a name she had heard only in passing. A billionaire, a philanthropist, a man who rarely made public appearances. She felt her knees go weak, and her voice caught in her throat. "Mr. Brandt," she managed to say. He smiled warmly. "Yes, Emily, please, sit," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. Emily obeyed, her hands trembling slightly as she sat down. The office was large and tastefully decorated, but it was the man himself who drew all her attention. There was a calm authority in his presence, yet he radiated kindness and patience. Emily struggled to form words, her mind racing with disbelief and curiosity. Alexander began to speak, explaining that he had been in the diner the previous evening. Emily's eyes widened even more. She had no idea who had been watching her, or why. He told her that the elderly man she had helped was his father. He often visited public places alone to observe how people treated others, especially those who were vulnerable or in need. Emily listened in stunned silence, barely believing what she was hearing. Everything she had done, the care, the patience, the small kindnesses had been noticed. "You didn't know I was watching," Alexander said, his voice calm, "but your actions spoke volumes. You treated my father with respect, kindness, and dignity, without expecting anything in return. That kind of character is rare, Emily, very rare." Emily felt a lump in her throat. She had only been doing what she thought was right, never imagining it could have such an impact, he continued, explaining that he had been so impressed by her honesty, compassion, and resilience that he wanted to offer her an opportunity. Emily's heart raced, a mix of fear and excitement. She could barely comprehend what he was saying. The words seemed surreal, almost like something out of a dream. Alexander explained that he ran a foundation supporting young people with potential, particularly those who worked hard despite difficult circumstances. He wanted her to be part of a new program that would provide her with education, financial support, and mentorship. Emily felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She had spent years working long hours, worried constantly about bills, her mother's health, and the uncertainty of the future. Never in her wildest dreams had she imagined a stranger noticing her struggles, or that a billionaire would offer to help change her life entirely. Alexander's words filled her with a mixture of disbelief, gratitude, and hope. He leaned back in his chair, watching her carefully. "You don't have to decide right now," he said gently. "But know that this is a real opportunity. I saw the way you care for others, the way you handle challenges, and I believe in your potential. Your actions tell me more about you than any resume ever could." Emily could hardly speak. She felt as though the weight of her life, all the stress and hard work, had suddenly been recognized in a way that felt almost magical. After a few moments, Emily nodded slowly, trying to gather her thoughts. She felt a mix of excitement and nervousness, unsure of what to say. Alexander gave her time, allowing her to absorb the situation, understanding that it was overwhelming. She realized how rare it was to be noticed not for her mistakes, her struggles, or her exhaustion, but for her integrity and kindness, the qualities she had always taken for granted. When the meeting concluded, Emily left the office in a daze. The city streets seemed different now, brighter somehow, and every sound and movement caught her attention. She replayed every word Alexander had said, the disbelief slowly giving way to hope. For the first time in years, she felt the possibility of a different life, one where her hard work and care for others could lead to something more, something bigger. As she walked home, Emily thought about the diner, about the elderly man she had helped, and about the long hours she had spent working without recognition. She realized that every small act, every moment of patience and kindness, had led her to this moment. She felt gratitude, awe, and a strange sense of destiny, understanding that life could change in ways one could never imagine, often when least expected. That night, Emily lay in bed, replaying the day's events over and over. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but she knew it was different now. She had been given a chance, not just for herself, but for her mother, for her dreams, and for a life she had once thought impossible. And in that quiet, sleepless night, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything was about to change forever. Emily's heart was pounding as she stepped out of the elevator and into the polished corridor of Brandt Industries. Every detail of the office seemed larger than life, the gleaming floors, the bright lights, and the soft hum of employees moving purposefully from room to room. She clutched her bag tightly, nerves and excitement twisting together inside her. She had never been anywhere like this before. The previous day's phone call had left her both curious and anxious. But now, standing here, the reality of what was happening was beginning to sink in. The receptionist had guided her to a large, glass-paneled office and told her to wait. Emily took a deep breath and looked around. Everything seemed so quiet, so controlled, and yet there was an energy in the air, a sense that something important was about to happen. She shifted nervously in her chair, trying to calm her racing thoughts. She thought about the man from the diner, the questions he had asked, and the kindness he had noticed in her. Could it really be him waiting for her behind that door? The thought seemed almost impossible, but a small spark of hope flickered in her chest. Moments later, the door opened, and there he was, Alexander Brandt. Seeing him in person was different from the brief glimpse she had caught in the diner. His presence was commanding, yet calm and approachable. There was a warmth in his eyes that made Emily feel at ease, even as her mind raced with questions. "Emily," he said, his voice steady but kind, "please, come in." She followed him into the office, her footsteps hesitant, unsure what to expect. Once inside, Emily took in the grandeur of the room. The walls were lined with bookshelves filled with titles on business, leadership, and philanthropy. There were framed awards and photos of Alexander at various charitable events. But it wasn't the decorations that drew her attention. It was him. He gestured to a chair opposite his massive desk, and Emily sat, hands clasped tightly in her lap. She felt a mix of nervousness and awe. This was the man who had observed her the night before, the man whose father she had helped without realizing the significance of the moment. Alexander began to speak, explaining why he had called her to the office. Emily listened, barely able to believe her ears. He told her that the elderly man she had served at the diner was, in fact, his father. He often went out alone to see how people treated others, especially those who were vulnerable or in need. Emily felt her mouth go dry as she processed his words. Everything she had done, the care, the patience, the little gestures, had been noticed. She had not realized it at the time, but her actions had left a lasting impression. "You didn't know I was watching," Alexander said, leaning slightly forward. "But your actions spoke louder than words. You treated my father with kindness and respect, without expecting anything in return. That is a rare quality, Emily. Very rare." Her hands trembled slightly as she listened, unable to fully grasp the situation. She had only been doing what came naturally to her, never imagining that someone as important as Alexander Brandt would notice her. He paused, letting the moment sink in, and then continued. "What struck me most was your honesty and integrity. The way you care for others, the way you face challenges without complaint, and the way you continue to work hard despite difficult circumstances. All of this shows me who you really are. And it's remarkable." Emily's eyes filled with tears. She had spent years working tirelessly, often feeling invisible, struggling to make ends meet, and worrying constantly about her mother's health. To hear that someone of such stature not only noticed her efforts but valued them was overwhelming. Alexander explained that he ran a foundation that supported young people with potential, particularly those who faced challenges but demonstrated exceptional character. He wanted to offer Emily an opportunity to join a new program, one that could provide education, financial support, and mentorship. Emily felt a rush of emotions, disbelief, hope, and excitement all mingling together. She had dreamed of opportunities like this, but they had always seemed out of reach, impossible for someone in her position. And now, it was happening. He leaned back in his chair, watching her carefully, and said, "I don't expect you to make a decision right now. I want you to understand that this is a genuine opportunity. I saw the way you treated my father, and I saw the way you carry yourself in life. That tells me more about you than any resume ever could." Emily felt a lump in her throat, overwhelmed by the sincerity of his words. She had never imagined that the simple acts of kindness she had shown at the diner could lead to something like this. For a few moments, they sat in silence. Emily tried to collect her thoughts, trying to reconcile her ordinary life with the extraordinary situation she now found herself in. She thought about her mother, about the long hours at the diner, about the sacrifices she had made and the dreams she had put on hold. Could this really be real? Could one act of kindness really change everything? Alexander's calm presence and genuine interest left her both nervous and hopeful. And she realized that she had been given a chance she had never thought possible. As the conversation continued, Alexander shared more about the foundation, the kind of support they provided, and the opportunities available for someone like Emily. He spoke of mentorship, scholarships and programs designed to help people grow and succeed. Emily listened intently, her mind racing with possibilities. She could hardly believe the turn her life had taken in such a short time. Everything she had worked for, every challenge she had faced, seemed suddenly connected to this moment. Emily's hand shook slightly as she considered what he was offering. It wasn't just a financial opportunity. It was a chance for education, for personal growth, and for a future she had once thought unattainable. She felt a mixture of gratitude and disbelief, unsure how to respond. Alexander noticed her hesitation and smiled reassuringly. "Take your time," he said. "Think about it. I wanted you to understand that this is real and that you have the potential to achieve great things. Your actions, your character, and your heart have brought you here." As the meeting came to an end, Emily felt a wave of emotions: overwhelm, hope, gratitude, and excitement. She realized that her life was on the brink of transformation, and that the choices she had made, the kindness she had shown without expectation, opened a door she never imagined could exist. Alexander stood and extended his hand. Emily shook it, feeling the weight of the moment and the promise it held. Walking out of the office, Emily felt like the world had shifted. The city streets seemed brighter, more alive, and filled with possibilities she had never considered. She replayed every word Alexander had said, every moment of the conversation, and realized that her life was no longer the same. She had been recognized, valued, and given an opportunity that could change everything for her and her mother. That night, Emily lay in bed, her mind racing with excitement and disbelief. She thought about the diner, about the elderly man she had helped, and about the ordinary moments that had led to this extraordinary opportunity. She understood that life could change in an instant, that small acts of kindness and integrity could have unimaginable effects. And as she drifted off to sleep, she allowed herself to believe that her future, once uncertain and filled with struggle, was now full of hope, possibility, and promise. Emily woke the next morning with a strange mix of excitement and nervousness. For the first time in years, she felt like the world had opened a door just for her, one that she hadn't even known existed. The offer from Alexander Brandt was unlike anything she had ever imagined. It wasn't just a job or a scholarship, it was a complete chance to transform her life. She had spent so long working tirelessly, struggling to support her mother and herself, and now, suddenly, it felt like all that effort had been noticed and valued in a way that could change everything. She got ready carefully, choosing her outfit with a mix of pride and anticipation. Every step toward the Brandt Industries office felt surreal. Her heart pounded as she entered the building, and the familiar receptionist greeted her warmly. Emily was led back to Alexander's office, where he welcomed her with the same calm, kind smile. "Good morning, Emily," he said. "I hope you've had some time to think." She nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She had thought about little else since their last meeting, imagining what her life could be like if she accepted the opportunity. Alexander began by explaining the full details of the program he was offering. It wasn't just financial support for education, though. That alone was life-changing. It was also mentorship. Emily would have access to experts in business, leadership, and community work, people who could help her grow both professionally and personally. Alexander emphasized that he was looking for someone who showed integrity, compassion, and resilience. These qualities, he said, cannot be taught in a classroom. You have them naturally, and that is why I want to help you reach your full potential. Emily listened in disbelief, trying to absorb the reality of what was happening. She thought about the long nights she had spent working double shifts, the worry she had carried about her mother's medical bills, and the sense of being trapped in a life that never seemed to change. And now, here was a man, a billionaire she had only known from distant news stories, offering her a chance to rewrite her future. She felt tears well up, not just from happiness, but from relief that someone had seen her struggles and recognized her efforts. Alexander asked her gently if she had any questions or concerns. Emily thought carefully. Her mind raced through everything she had dreamed about: studying business, starting her own cafe one day, having financial stability, being able to care for her mother without constant worry. "Will I really be able to do this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Alexander smiled reassuringly. "Yes, Emily. We believe in your abilities, and we will provide all the support you need. But more importantly, we believe in your character. That is what will carry you forward, even when challenges arise." He explained that the first step would be a scholarship to continue her education, followed by hands-on experience in the foundation and its projects. Emily would meet other young people who had shown remarkable dedication and heart, creating a community of support and growth. She felt her excitement building as she imagined herself learning new skills, meeting mentors, and being part of something bigger than she had ever known. After going through all the details, Alexander paused. "Emily, I want you to know that this opportunity is not just about helping you, it's about what you can do with it. Your life has already touched people in ways you may not realize, and this is a chance for you to touch many more lives. We saw how you treated my father, how you care for others, and we know that with guidance and support, you can make a real difference in the world." Emily's mind was spinning. She had never thought of herself as someone capable of making a big impact beyond the diner, beyond her small circle of family and friends. But hearing Alexander say this, seeing the genuine belief in his eyes, gave her courage she hadn't known she possessed. She realized that her kindness, her patience, and her resilience were not just traits that helped her survive, they were traits that could help her thrive, help others along the way. When the meeting concluded, Emily felt a mixture of exhilaration and nervousness. She thanked Alexander sincerely, her voice full of emotion. She stepped out of the office and walked through the building, her mind buzzing with possibilities. Everything felt different. The air seemed fresher, the city brighter, and even the ordinary sounds of traffic and footsteps felt full of promise. She thought about her mother, who would be overjoyed to hear about this life-changing opportunity. She imagined finally being able to relieve some of the constant worry and financial pressure that had dominated their lives for so long. Over the next few weeks, Emily began her new journey. She enrolled in courses, met mentors, and began learning skills that had once seemed beyond her reach. Every day was a challenge, but also an adventure. She discovered a strength in herself that she hadn't fully recognized before, a combination of determination, compassion, and intelligence that allowed her to adapt and grow in ways she had never imagined. Each small success, each new lesson, reinforced the belief that she was capable of achieving more than she had ever dared to hope. At the same time, she maintained her connection to the diner and the community that had shaped her. She never forgot the people who had supported her in small ways. And she often reflected on how her ordinary actions, like helping an elderly man at a small diner, could lead to extraordinary outcomes. She shared her story quietly with close friends and colleagues, not to boast, but to remind herself and others that kindness and integrity mattered, and that sometimes life rewards them in unexpected ways. As months passed, Emily's life began to transform in tangible ways. Her mother's medical bills were covered, her financial stress eased, and she could focus on building a future that once felt impossible. She gained confidence in herself, in her abilities, and in the idea that hard work combined with compassion could lead to opportunities beyond her imagination. She also began contributing to the Foundation's projects, helping other young people find paths to success. Just as she had been given a path, one day, Emily returned to the diner, not as a waitress struggling to make ends meet, but as someone who had a story of hope and transformation to share. The regulars noticed the change, the confidence in her posture, the calm in her demeanor, the joy in her smile. She remembered the long hours, the fatigue, and the uncertainty, and felt gratitude for the moment that had changed everything. Her story became a quiet inspiration to those around her, proof that a single act of kindness could ripple outward in ways no one could predict. Emily realized that life was no longer just about surviving. It was about thriving, growing, and using her experiences to help others. She understood that the world could feel harsh and unfair, but small acts of compassion and integrity could open doors in the most unexpected ways. She had been transformed not only by opportunity, but by the recognition that her character, her choices, and her heart mattered. Looking back, Emily thought of that evening at the diner, of the man she had helped without knowing the impact it would have. That single act of kindness, done without expectation, had set her on a path she could never have imagined. Her life had changed, not because she had sought attention or reward, but because she had been herself, honest, kind, and hardworking. And as she looked forward, Emily felt hope, purpose, and determination, knowing that her journey was only beginning and that the possibilities ahead were endless.